While the Prime Minister is doing all of that, as you know, he's also been pushing on both domestically and internationally to make Canada what he calls an energy superpower. Now, the former Environment Minister, now the Minister of Canadian Identity or Heritage, Steven Guilbeault, is pushing back on building new pipelines.
As far as I know, there are no investors right now. There are no companies that are saying that they want to build an east-west pipeline. And as you know, these things are built by companies, not governments.
Those comments have been criticized by both federal Conservatives and those in Alberta. The new minister taking over the energy file is that man, Tim Hodgson. He brings a wealth of experience in the oil patch and energy sector, and he's expected to head out west as early as this week. Alberta's energy sector will be watching Hodgson's comments and policy signals very closely to see if the new Carney government will, in fact, chart a different path forward on how Ottawa deals with natural resources. Earlier, I spoke with an executive of one of Canada's largest oil and gas companies about the future of the industry. Joining me now is Adam Waterous, Executive Chairman of Strathcona Resources and CEO of Waterous Energy Fund. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to see you, Rosemary.
You were part of a group of energy CEOs who wrote to the federal government, called on Ottawa to strengthen Canada through and our economic sovereignty through the energy industry. So let me get your sense on what you saw in Cabinet this past week and whether you think that the new Minister of Natural Resources and maybe the Minister of Environment tell you whether that message has been heard.
Sure. So maybe I should state my bias up front. My family and I have partnered with the federal government over the last few years on reducing both industrial emissions and consumer emissions. So I've also had a very good working relationship with this federal government in reducing emissions. So that's my bias, okay, which I think is important to have. Essentially, one thing that's changed quite dramatically over the last several months is the Canadian public desire to see investments in energy infrastructure, LNG facilities, pipelines. And the energy industry is always interested in building that kind of stuff. But historically, over the last 8+ years, there has not been capital available to the industry to be able to build those because of the regulatory environment. And so in response to numerous calls on the industry to advance projects, what the industry simply did is said, well, if you want the private sector to do this, these are the requirements that would have to be made, and changes to policy and regulatory frameworks to be able to attract private sector investment to build pipelines and LNG facilities. Now, building pipelines and LNG facilities doesn't have to be done with private sector. It could be done by public funds. You could have state-owned enterprises do it. That's what happened with Trans Mountain, was a state-owned enterprise. And that's, of course, a valid alternative that the government may want to consider. So that's just the background on the letter itself.
So going back to where I started then, what signs do you see from this new cabinet, this new government, that some of the things that you and other energy CEOs have called for are being considered, that the regulatory environment will get easier?
So we went through a very specific list of essentially half a dozen things, which was kind of what we would describe as a how-to list of getting private sector investment. And we sent those requirements to all the leaders, so it wasn't just to Mark Carney, as to what was going to be required. Now, during the campaign, frankly, it was disappointing, the response from Mark Carney on the campaign trail. For instance, we said, you're going to have to need to scrap C-69, the so-called No More Pipelines bill. He said no. We're going to have to scrap the hard cap on emissions. He said no. We said you're going to have to scrap the federal industrial carbon tax. He said no. We said you need a hard approval project for approvals of 6 months. He said 2 years. So it was fairly discouraging during the campaign. Now, having said that, sometimes what's said in a campaign and actually what gets implemented, parties in government can be two very different things.
Sure.
There seems to be a continued desire from the Prime Minister to build LNG facilities to build pipelines, as he likes to say, at a scale never seen before, at a pace never seen before. Now, how that's going to get done, he has a very clear fork in the road. He doesn't have to use the private sector. We think there's good reasons why he might choose to do that, but we recognize that that's not the only thing. He could create, much like the Liberal government did 50 years ago, Petro-Canada to respond to another international crisis. So, well, this is an international crisis. You could create a Petro-Canada 2.0.
Yeah.
To be able to
I don't know how people in Alberta would feel about that, but so Minister Hodgson, who has some experience with the oil sands sector and in the industry, is coming out to Alberta this coming week, is my understanding. But in the meantime, Minister Guilbeault, I'm not sure if you saw his comments this week, said that nothing further should be built unless and until the infrastructure that is in place is used at capacity. And I wonder what you made of those comments, how you reconcile all of those different things.
Well, the fact of the matter is Trans Mountain is, but by various estimates, are expected to be, the Trans Mountain pipeline is set to be filled by 2027. What we're looking to try and do is be able to have additional, when you think about pipelines, specifically oil pipelines, what we're trying to essentially do is to be able to get a pipeline in service in 3 years. That's essentially 6 months for approvals, another 6 months for full engineering, 2 years of construction. That's 3 years, which is essentially when the next pipeline is going to be needed. I think there's maybe a little bit of confusion as to what the market demand was.
Yeah.
Lots of market demand. That's not that the industry has no concern about that. And I quickly would say, the Build Canada Now initiative was just talked about regulatory reform. It didn't call for any money from the federal government to be invested in the industry. The industry will do this. We just can't get money from investors with the current regulatory environment in it. So that's why we keep on saying, well, it's either got to be the public purse or private sector. The industry always wants to build stuff. The reason they haven't done, there's been no major project sanctioning over the last 8 years, is because the industry can't get the money to do it, given the current regulatory environment.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there, but can we talk again? I'd like to talk again once the minister is in place and has had some conversations in Alberta, and we have a better sense about what the government's going to do with some of those concerns that you raised.
That'd be great. Look forward to talking to you again, Rosemary.
Okay, thank you.
We look forward to building, and I look forward to digging in. We have a lot to do. I look forward to working with my provincial and territorial counterparts, our Indigenous partners, our industrial partners, and other stakeholders to build a more prosperous, secure, and safe Canada. And I will be going out west very soon.
New Minister of Energy and Natural Resources there, Tim Hodgson. There was confusion just a few minutes later when the former Environment Minister, Steven Guilbeault, says that as far as he knows, no one wants to build a new pipeline and that no new pipeline should be built until others are at full capacity. So what message is the Canadian energy sector taking from this? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Rob Russo, the Canadian correspondent for The Economist, former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief, Robert Benzie, the Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Emma Graney, an energy reporter for the Globe and Mail in Calgary. So obviously we're going to start with you, Emma, also because I owed you a starting point. Let's start with the Steven Guilbeault comments that were in part inaccurate in terms of how much capacity the Trans Mountain was actually using, but also making the suggestion that a pipeline is not needed until everything's running at capacity. How did that go over out there?
You might imagine that fell pretty flat, that messaging. And of course, Premier Danielle Smith has already brought up these concerns about Guilbeault and the comments that the the vibe of the new Environment Minister as well. But that idea that you only need to build capacity, you only need to build something once you're at capacity, is pretty much proven to be incorrect. When it comes to pipelines, when it comes to roads, when it comes to any form of infrastructure, power lines, whatever you want to look at it, you've got to start preparing. You've got to start building things for the future. And that's what the new energy minister is really going to have a lot on his hands here, because even though, he's actually receiving a pretty warm reception, I would say, from the oil and gas sector, or those who I've spoken with, who are looking at him going, well, he was on the board of a massive oil sands producer. He has capital markets experience. This is something we need to see. And certainly they are pretty, I would say, optimistic about where things might land with this new energy minister and how he might treat the energy sector, particularly coming off of Prime Minister Carney's comments that he wants to make Canada an energy superpower. So they're looking pretty happily at his appointment right now.
So how should we make sense of that, Rob Benzie, then, that this is Stephen Guilbeault doing what he does, and that it doesn't matter that because the Prime Minister has signaled other things?
I do not understand why a minister who is no longer tasked with overseeing the Ministry of Environment is commenting on such issues. He is the Minister of Heritage. He's got a lot on his plate. I don't know why Mr. Guilbeault felt the need to weigh in on something and then to muddy the waters by getting his facts wrong. I think at the end of the day, the Prime Minister is the boss, and what the Prime Minister says will go. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see, Rosie, in the days and weeks ahead, how many ministers are defenestrated. And I think that Mr. Carney, we know, is not someone who suffers fools gladly. We know this from his work at the Bank of Canada, at the Bank of England, at Goldman Sachs. He is not, I gather, someone who is particularly patient. If you are late for meetings, he doesn't like that. So I'm not sure he's going to love cabinet ministers shooting their mouths off on files that are not theirs.
Yeah. I will just say I do appreciate his punctuality. It served me well today as we were trying to get this show going for 10 o'clock. Rob Russo, what I think the problem here is that Stephen Guilbeault sort of had to be kept in cabinet because he was important to Mark Carney's campaign in Quebec. But the problem with keeping him in cabinet is that it feeds into all those theories that Danielle Smith and others have, that this is the same government, that there is no change, and that it is a government that is not interested in resource development.
I would counter that by saying I remember Mark Carney when he was a ferocious advocate of the carbon tax, and he scrapped the carbon tax. I remember just a year or two ago when François Legault was saying that there was no social license for a pipeline from West to Eastern Canada. This week, François Legault said that there is an opening there now for this pipeline because of the threat coming from the United States. Mr. Guilbeault was very wrong about the TMX pipeline. And I would also remind people in Alberta that he was a member of a government that went out and bought the pipeline. Despite what he thinks about pipelines, the government went out and bought the pipeline and saw the capacity of that pipeline triple as of the end of last year. So a lot has changed. The Prime Minister's made it clear that he's even open to change on C-69, and by allowing for a single environmental review. It could be the province of Alberta's environmental review, the province of BC's review. Much has changed. Maybe if Mr. Guilbeault hasn't changed, a lot has changed around him, including the Prime Minister, and Mr. Guilbeault is not responsible for that file anymore.
And Emma, talk a little bit about that, the fact that there is this, I don't know if it's all attributable to Donald Trump, maybe, but this window for resource development that maybe wasn't there, as little as 3 months ago, that seems to be real. Is there a sense that it's real in Alberta? Do people see opportunity where there was none before?
They absolutely do. I would 100% say that is the case here in Alberta, particularly with the oil and gas sector. I mean, you're right off of the back of the trade war and, this idea of, oh no, we send almost all of our stuff down to the US. It's a single customer. What if suddenly we get 80% tariffs or something? Not that would happen. But, there is a real sense of fear and of we need to expand our markets. Now, the oil and gas sector here in Alberta has been saying that for many, many years, and that's why they were pushing TMX. That's why they've been pushing all kinds of Keystone, for example, different, not that would have helped with the Tidewater access, but there is a real sense that under the change in government, with this new messaging from Ottawa, that perhaps something will be done on that front. There is a hope and optimism and indeed an expectation that something will be done on the natural resources development front. That's oil, that's gas. And Carney as well has mentioned renewables, so that's part of this whole thing as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think people are really looking forward to where this goes, but he's going to have to move very quickly. Tim Hodgson's going to have to move very quickly, and he's going to have to mend some bridges that have been burned well and truly with Ottawa and the oil and gas sector.
Yeah, well, Rob Benzie, talk to me about that. This is about managing expectations and relationships, because some people don't have time for federal Liberals on these issues.
Exactly. And again, remember, Rosie, this is all happening against the backdrop of this smoldering Alberta secession movement. I don't personally believe that Alberta will vote to separate if indeed a referendum is held. But I think that the tensions, the national unity tensions, cannot be ignored. And I think that Prime Minister Carney is aware of that. He has, the Liberals have a credibility problem in Western Canada. I think that's why he is having the First Minister's meeting in Saskatoon in a couple of weeks, and he wants to set in motion a government that's different than the Trudeau government. To what Rob was saying earlier, this is not. I mean, he has made some changes in his own belief system, I guess, in terms of consumer carbon taxes and things like that. And I think Donald Trump has changed the equation. Danielle Smith has changed the equation within Canada. And I think that's something that Mr. Carney is mindful of. And I think that we have to be aware of that. Yeah. It's really significant that Tim Hodgson is heading to Western Canada and is trying, as Emma said, to build some bridges, because those bridges weren't there. And Alberta's alienation from Ottawa is a real thing. But I think it's not. It's something that I think it's something that can be corrected, or at least tackled.
Yeah, 20 seconds to you, Rob Russo.
I would say that the business community is looking for a signal. They want to see that time and investment is worthwhile. So they want to see some sort of legislative signal from the federal government before they invest money again. Money is there if that money is not going to be wasted. In terms of the threat of independence, I'm old, so I remember Quebec independence being at 30% in 1995, only to come within a whisker of losing the country. Do not unleash the furies. The furies have been unleashed in Western Canada. Mark Carney needs to pay attention to it.
Thank you all very much for spending part of your Sunday with me. Rob Russo, Robert Benzie, Emma Graney. Thank you. Hope you go enjoy your day now. Thanks.